Well, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce at least our uh, primary speaker this evening. Um, Dave Bever it's executive director, is it not, Dave?
It is.
The executive director of the Delaware Center for Justice, which on whose board I also sit and occasionally do something. But Dave does a lot, and I went on the site, Dave, and I couldn't find your biography to refresh my recollection. But that's
I
probably
can talk a
because,
little bit about that if you like.
yeah. Well, I was going to say before you came to us, you were the head of, if my memory serves, the ACLU Delaware chapter.
I was director of development and very briefly the interim director when they were in between directors. Yes.
Okay.
That's what brought me to Delaware in the first place.
But rather than have me inaccurately, and we were so lucky to get Dave.
What happened?
He came to us at a time where we really we needed Ashley Biden had been our prior ED, and Ashley left Delaware to go down to Florida for a while, and we were looking for a new director, and we were fortunate enough to find Dave, who has been just a phenomenal leader for the organization. And I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce whoever else is joining you. I'm not sure whether she's with you now or not.
Caitlin was unable to join us, but Tali Nichols is here, and I'd like to shout out to him. When I went off on mute a few minutes ago, that was me having poorly given the Zoom link for tonight to Tali, so I was connected with him to make sure he could get here to join us tonight. But Tali is our systems navigator, and he works with our expungement cases, the people we help get their criminal records cleared. And he's going to talk a little bit more about his work, which has been a big part of what has grown at DCJ in the last couple of years. But for now, I'll let him say hello.
Evening to all. I am again Tali Nichols, systems navigator for DCJ, and I've been at DCJ for over a year now, going on 18 months. It's a wonderful experience. Dave, do you want me to get into what I do now, or you want me to come back to that?
I think I'm going to do an overview of all our work generally, and then you can talk about your work, and I'll talk a little bit about policy in Caitlin's absence, so I'm sure I won't do it the justice she would have done.
Okay.
So, very good. And just to give you a short biography of me, as I said, I came to Delaware about 8 years ago to be the director of development for the ACLU before coming on board at DCJ. My career began as an adult probation officer in central Pennsylvania with domestic violence cases. That work led me into the victim services world, and I ran 2 nonprofits in Pennsylvania at the community level, one in York, Pennsylvania, and one in the Poconos, as well as having done some state work around victim services before I came to Delaware. So that very briefly brings you up to date with me. And I'm going to share my screen here, the PowerPoint ready. So just to give you a short history, and I suspect some of you have probably heard one of our presentations before, so I will try to highlight what has changed recently at DCJ. But we have been fighting for justice in Delaware for over a century. We are 103 years old. We will be 104 years old on June 10th, 2024. We have managed to endure that long without a national organization, unlike something like the ACLU or Easter Seals, where there's the local affiliate at the state level and then a national organization to provide support. DCJ has kind of done it on its own. When we began 103 years ago, we were very specifically focused as an entirely volunteer, advocacy-driven organization called the Prisoners Aid Society. The group of folks who got together on that June night back in 1920 had a list of things they wanted to do to improve the correction system in Delaware, one of which including getting rid of the whipping post, which took quite a bit of time. So that some of these fights take a very long time, but obviously we stay in them. And DCJ has changed its name several times over the years, but just as importantly, we've changed the composition of what we do. We are now probably 85% focused on direct services to folks who are justice impacted at every level, and I'm going to walk us through some of those services shortly. And the remaining 15% of what we do is policy advocacy. And my colleague, Caitlin Richards, is our director of policy, helms that with a committee that includes folks from the community and board members who help us develop a policy agenda every year that is both proactive, things we have historically embraced as DCJ's policy priorities, and reactive to whatever's going on at Leg Hall. So quickly, if you want, there we go. You can either drop this in the chat or say it out loud. What do you hope to learn about DCJ this evening? Because you're going to get a very broad overview and a very breezy one. And as we go along, if there's any aspect of our work you're particularly interested in, or if I missed something, please feel free to ask. Okay, so during the pandemic, we updated our mission statement to really focus our work in sort of 3 buckets. And those buckets are that we listen, we amplify, and we act to seek justice for all Delawareans through advocacy and services. We felt like the work we do fell sort of evenly into those buckets. The listening work being present in the community, listening to the work of other advocates, listening to the work of impacted people, amplifying what they're experiencing. And I think Tali's going to share some stories this evening, and I'm going to share some of my experiences. And we act. Obviously, the services we provide, the policy work we do is geared toward changing how things are done here in Delaware to the betterment of justice of all people. Just to sort of frame everything we do, I snagged this quote from our Attorney General at a presentation she did about 2 weeks after I started on this job, which was back in December of 2019, so pre-pandemic. She probably does not remember that she said this, but when I heard her say it, I wrote it down. I'm like, I've got to remember that. That's very important. That we must reject the false choice between compassion and justice. We can have both. We can have victims being made whole. We can have people being held accountable, and we can still have a system, at least we can imagine a system that is compassionate. I think you would probably agree we are not there yet. But I just thought it was a terrific quote that actually frames what DCJ has been doing for the last century plus. And I'll walk you through our programs and our program areas. Our largest division, more than half of our budget, is adult, institutional, and reentry services. That includes the core program of that, which has been around for over 20 years now, over 25 years now, the Community Reintegration Services Program, which until 2019 provided evidence-based case management service using various evidence-based tools to folks who were on probation in Newcastle County exclusively. In 2019, not long before I arrived at DCJ, we received funding to expand those services into Kent and Sussex counties, and we have managed to sustain that service. But it was still that core case management service that usually became involved with someone on probation well after they had left the prison. Enter transitional reentry. That was a contract that became available right at the height of the pandemic in summer of 2020. When the Department of Corrections was looking for someone to start working with both the prisons as folks were preparing to get out, and to have someone at the prison gate when someone gets released for a warm handoff. So that person can have someone to drive them around, take them to their appointments, make sure they get to their probation visits, get to their treatment visits, and really just help them acclimate back out and be the person that gets them where they need to go. So on those very critical early days of reentry. The program typically operates within the first 90 days of release. It has a case management component in addition to the transportation component. And the folks who do those transportations, we call them peer specialists. We deliberately and purposefully chose to have folks who had a criminal record to be the people who drove those folks around, so they could talk to them and become sort of their informal mentor as they were providing those transportation services, to really let them know what to expect of reentry. That it is a difficult journey, but it can be done. And these are the folks who are doing this work, are folks who have themselves completed their own reentry journeys. In 2021, we applied for and received funding in 2022 for employment and expungement services. As Tali said, that's sort of his wheelhouse, so I'm going to let him talk about what that looks like in a few minutes. But our employment services is kind of unique. We have a staff person who travels the state, fingers crossed soon to be 2 staff people, who do the traditional helping folks write resumes, helping them develop soft skills for employment and job interviews and practice those kinds of things. But what our employment specialist has done is built out a network of second chance employers. When he came to us, that portfolio started at around 160. It's now well over 200 employers, most of whom pay more than minimum wage, and all of whom specifically will hire folks with a criminal record. Because what we realized that some folks came to us, they'd come out of prison, they'd be on probation, and they would tell us, I can operate a forklift. I've been a welder. I've done this. I've done that. So they have some of the hard skills to be able to enter the workforce right away if they knew who would hire them with a record. So we decided to be their network and build a network of those employers for them. So in addition to the soft skills, Anthony Stanziel, who's our employment specialist, can literally say, okay, that's what you know how to do. Great. Call these people. They'll give you a job right away. And we work very closely with those employers to make sure we know when folks are hiring, and we're always looking to grow that list. So if you have businesses that you know of that either you're involved with or you know of that would be interested in being second chance employers, we're actually going to begin late this fall a public relations campaign around those businesses. We've designed a big sticker they can put in their windows, and we're going to do some social media around them, allowing themselves to share why it means so much to them to be second chance employers. We also have always, our case management has included helping folks who are reentering find stable and safe housing, because we know from the research, from our experience, those are the 2 pieces that make someone's reentry that much more likely to be successful, is that they have a job, they have safe and stable housing, and then we can work with them on whatever else is going on in their life that's a barrier to their reentry, whether it's relations with their family, substance abuse issues, mental health issues. But those 2 things are the biggest indicators of success. And we are incredibly excited to announce that we are about to launch our biggest expansion of reentry, which is in the housing realm, specifically around substance use disorder issues. But what it amounts to is DCJ was the largest recipient of funds from the Lieutenant Governor's office from the Opioid Abatement Fund, which will allow us to hire some staff to do some case management around housing and substance use disorder. But most importantly, we will have a large pot of money every year that we can help folks with, if they need it, emergency shelter, but most importantly, first month's rent and security deposits. Because again, this work is about breaking down barriers. A lot of folks we work with, they might be able to scrape up the money for a month's rent, but they can't get the month's rent and security deposit. Well, if we can get them in an apartment, get them a job, we know that they'll be able to sustain that and it's a much more dignified and much more enriching experience for them than having to be in a shelter or couch surf if they have to. It really brings back the dignity that makes them want to succeed. Another part of our institutional reentry services is our institution-based programming. We have 2 programs currently. One is called SELF, and I'm going to kick myself for not remembering what that stands for, but I can tell you what it's about. It's a program for women at Baylor who are about to transition back out in the community. It helps them to make better decisions moving forward, to identify the positive resources within their own networks, family members, friends, treatment providers, et cetera, who can be a really positive support for them. And the other institutional program we have, which operates both in the men's and women's prisons, is called Read In, Read Out. And what that program does is allows folks to read a children's book. We record it on a CD to a child in their life, either their own child or a niece, nephew, grandchild, someone they love. And with that recording of the book, a brief message of love to the child. We love this program. It was the one that took the hardest hit during the lockdown, but we're just getting it up and running again. And we're really excited to start connecting with folks on the inside to allow them to do something positive for the children in their lives on the outside. So that's the dry version of what those programs are about. But the reason I put this quote up here, it's more than a bus pass. One of the things that was a bit of a surprise to me when I got to DCJ is how often I was writing checks for bus passes. Our reentry staff are always giving bus passes to their clients. And it seems like it's such a small thing, a bus pass that costs 10, 15 bucks. But what it is to the people we serve, it's a ride to a treatment appointment that's going to help keep them clean, that's going to provide them the supportive group they need to stay sober, to get support for their mental health needs. It's going to help them get to see their kids. It's going to help them get to work or get to a job interview so they can get to work and then maybe not need bus passes anymore. They might be able to afford a car of their own. But it's just that one little thing that may seem so insurmountable to us, that is not insurmountable, excuse me, that might seem so small to us, that represents breaking an insurmountable barrier to them. And that's kind of how it is. The work Tali does, one of the gateways to that is that folks have to get their criminal record expunged, they have to pay for their fingerprints and they have to pay for the actual application fee for the expungement. And I think that it's going up. Tali, I'm sure you'll say more about that, but those two things together were $52 and $75 respectively, or $127. Well, for the people we work with, that's more money than they spend on groceries in a month. It is absolutely an immovable barrier to them to getting to where they need to go. So a simple bus pass is a very big thing, and $127 is a very big thing. So before I move on, are there any questions about our adult reentry and institutional programs? Everybody's hand is up. I can only see 4 or 5 of you at a time. Very good. Okay, moving on.
What are your numbers?
Go ahead.
What are your numbers?
And I'm going to be able to give you overall numbers, not necessarily just for adult reentry. We serve about 2,000 people a year.
Okay.
Total across all our programs. If you want some more detailed information, I'm happy to get it for you. Our second largest endeavor is youth and diversion services, which again is kind of exactly what it says. The first program I'll talk about, victim offender mediation program, is exactly what it sounds like. What it does is it allows the person who has been harmed, the victim of crime, and the person who's caused them harm to come together, ideally come up with some kind of agreement for some restorative activity. It's all of this is steeped in restorative justice, that the person who caused harm can do to make the victim feel whole again. It can be something as simple as paying restitution for damages done, doing some community service at a place the victim thinks is appropriate. It can even be something, and this happens a lot with the kids we work with, as simple as writing a letter of apology that is meaningful and comes from the heart. And we work with kids to make sure that they are doing that when that's what is asked of them. But that program actually serves both youth and adults. The program is growing with young people. We're getting a lot more referrals from the juvenile courts. We also do some landlord-tenant mediation on the civil side of things, not that much, I understand, but we do have that service available. The reentry programs I spoke of before operate statewide. This particular program operates in Newcastle County exclusively. We share this contract with the state with People's Place, which provides the service in Kent and Sussex, and we provide training together and do some strategic planning together over this work. Our other longstanding youth and diversion program is the school offense diversion program, which is exactly what it sounds like. When a kid gets a charge at school, they are referred to us, and we put them through a very intensive case management, supportive counseling process, one-on-one with a trained facilitator who works with them, works with their parents, to really break down what were the root causes of the behavior and how to prevent it from happening again. And in the cases of both victim offender mediation and school offense diversion, when the youth completes the program, the charges are dropped or their record is expunged, depending on where they're at in the process. We have been very proud of the school offense diversion program for a long time, and we have worked with the Department of Ed in hopes of getting it in the schools so we can work with kids before they get charges, before they're in danger of slipping into the school to prison pipeline. And we are very happy to announce that earlier this year, we received some funding to pilot such a program. We are currently in Gunning, Bedford, and George Reed middle schools. We started over the summer, first with some work with the kids who were in summer school and with teaching the restorative practices that underlie the program to faculty and staff, so they would be ready for us to come this year. And when a kid presents with a behavioral problem that has not resulted in a criminal charge, they can still be referred to us, and we have 2 staff who are able to work through this process with them and ideally help them to learn what was behind their behavior, to better control that behavior and not wind up in the criminal legal system. And I said we just started that, so hopefully if I can come back and talk to you next year, I'll have some good stuff to report about how that program is doing, and especially we hope that Department of Ed or the Criminal Justice Council will see fit to fund it in more schools. Last year, we also launched restorative reentry for youth. That was taking our model of case management with a little bit of it for adults, with a little bit of a twist, and applying it to a youth population, a very specific one. In this case, we work with kids who are just about to come out of the detention center in Newcastle County, working with them on the inside with some soft employment skills, and when they get out with some hard employment skills and job placement, because these are kids who are about to age out of placement and are really, we work with them also to connect them with GEDs as well, but we want to get them a job and sort of help them stay on the straight and narrow. But what's really cool about this program, the twist I talked about, is that again, it has this restorative justice framework. So when the kid's still detained, we get them in on a Zoom call and bring in parents and caregivers, probation, treatment providers, and other folks that the kid identifies as a positive influence to conduct the first of a series of restorative circles. And the plan that comes out of those restorative circles takes the place of the traditional and more clinical treatment plan that would normally happen. So the kid is always at the center. They're always sort of guiding the ship and saying what they need and what would work best for them. And then at intervals after they get out, that restorative circle reconvenes to monitor progress, to make adjustments if necessary in the plan, and to make sure the kid is getting their needs met by the folks who are participating in that restorative circle. Just like the last slide, I included a quote, and this is actually from a kid who was in our restorative reentry for youth program. We had been working with him. He was one of the first kids in the program. We've been working with him on the inside, managed to get arranged for him to start a job as soon as he got out of the detention center. And when he got out, he has gotten his start date. He knew he had a job, and he fell in with some of the bad crowd he'd been with and got shot. He survived. He was injured, but he was okay. And when the head of that program went to the hospital to check on him, the first thing he said is, "Do I still have my job?" And indeed he did. We got him working. And that, like I said, that program is about 1.5 years, 2 years old now. And again, we're hoping that expands, and maybe we can start doing this work with some younger kids as we continue to see some positive results there. So any questions about our youth programming? Roger.
I had a question about the school offense diversion. What about kids that are not showing up at school? Do you get involved in situations where they're they just drop out before they're aged out?
We actually had, and I can talk a little bit about sort of what I've brought to DCJ. A few years before I arrived, we had a robust truancy program. It was funded by the Bloomberg Foundation, doing good work in the schools with that population precisely. As far as I know, the school offense diversion program doesn't take those kids. This program, our truancy program did. Unfortunately, the funding ended. What I have tried to do, and we would love to get it back, but what we have done since I've been there is we've grown programs. We tried to make sure it was sustainable funding, or at least contract funding with the state, that we can have some guarantee that it's renewable from year to year, so we don't have that happen again.
Yeah, because it just seems like, I think during the pandemic, we lost a lot of kids.
Absolutely.
Didn't show up. So I think the need there is huge, I would suspect, because I'm guessing many didn't come back.
Hey, Roger, you're asking a really, for me, a sensitive question, because when I came on the board, that was one of the programs that really attracted me. And when the Bloomberg funding grant ended, we struggled for I think it was almost 2 years before Dave was there, to try to find funding to keep that program going, because like you, I thought that was a really critical program. But we didn't have the victim offender mediation program, I don't believe. And
not with the youth. No, you did not.
Yeah. And so we added that, but I agree with you. I would love to see us be able to fund a number of things, which we'll come to maybe, including that program.
I would say that I think the Restorative Futures program, which is a fancy way of saying school offense diversion in school, that's what we called it before we gave it a name. Because we have a little bit more control of the kids who are referred to that. If that were to grow, I think because it really connects caregiver and the youth and focuses on the accountability of both, that would be an ideal venue for talking about truancy issues. So we might be able to use that as a window to reach those kids. Craig and Maria.
David, I had a question for you. I wanted to know how you get your initial referrals for adults and youth. And also I wanted to know, are you doing any mental health or substance use screening to support them in their recovery?
To answer your first question, all of these referrals are systems based. For the folks who come into adult reentry, they're coming or transitional reentry, they're referred to us directly from either the prison side of the DOC or probation and parole. Youth and diversion, victim offender mediation cases come straight from the court. So there is a court process before they get to us that we sort of interrupt. And if our work is successful, and it usually is successful, that program has great results, then the court's out of the picture. School offense diversion, as the name would imply, the kid does have to catch a charge. Restorative Futures, we're excited because even though it is systems-based referrals from the school, the kids don't have a record yet, and they don't have that burden. I'm hoping as that program grows, and again, fingers crossed that it will, and we have staff based in the schools, I think our staff are actually going to become more and more a part of identifying the kids, and maybe even a resource for kids to come to and say, maybe, I think I would benefit from this. And restorative reentry for youth, that's also referred from the courts, and that was from YRS, Rehabilitative Services. And that was the first question you asked. What was the second? I apologize for forgetting.
That's okay. Any mental health or substance use screening?
We do thorough screenings with every client that comes through the door, and make referrals for additional services as necessary. That is one thing we have not typically done is the more or less therapeutic side of mental health and substance use disorder. We do case management around it. Obviously, it's something that impacts a lot of the folks we work with. We do have one program, which I have not talked about yet, that does offer therapy, and that's our Adult Victim Services program. But the rest of that stuff would be done by other agencies, allies and partners. But we do have substance use specific case management within our adult reentry. So there we go. Doesn't want to change slides. So 3 more program areas of mention. Adult Victim Services is, again, exactly what it sounds like. It's for adults 50 and older in Newcastle County specifically who have been the victim of any kind of crime. By and large, we are dealing with people who have been victims of financial abuse or domestic violence at the hands of loved ones. But any person who had experienced a crime could and met the other criteria could be part of that program. That program offered, and those referrals usually come from the police victim service departments, but folks can find us in the phone book. That's one of the few programs we offer where folks can refer themselves. They see us on their website, they see us on Facebook, what have you. Then in that program, they receive very close case management to help them navigate the system, because when you're a victim of crime, you're expected to know everything about the system that folks who work in the system know, and you don't. And that is the program where we also have a therapist on staff to provide therapy free of cost. All of our programs are free of cost, with one very tiny and specific exception. If someone is referred to victim offender mediation because of shoplifting, we do provide at cost an impact of shoplifting training for them, that we don't make a profit. They pay us what we pay for it. Healing Spaces is unique. This is one of the few services that DCJ has opted to fund ourselves. Our donor dollars fund this. It is a small but mighty service. Not long after George Floyd, talking with advocates, activists, social workers of color, dealing with the system and having to provide services all day or advocate for policy reform all day in this climate where they look like the people who are being impacted by police violence. We thought we should do something about that, and one of our awesome staff thought of this idea, and we are providing this service now. They meet twice monthly. It's an open-ended group. Folks can come and talk about the experience of being a person of color in this work. But there's, like I said, it's open-ended. Folks can come and go as they please. And lastly, Partners for Justice is a national initiative based out of Brooklyn, New York, that provides services at public defenders' offices for folks who are on bail or pending trial, to help with case management, to sort of help them get their life in order before they have to stare down a judge. A lot of the stuff we do on the reentry side of things, I call this pre-entry. So helping folks get a job, helping folks secure housing, helping folks identify positive networks within their own, get the treatment they need. The Partners for Justice do that, and there are currently 5 of them, I believe, based out of the Office of Defense Services. We are simply the folks that cut them a check and pay their benefits. They are supervised out of ODS, but they do participate in our staff meetings, and our staff share information about resources. So any questions about those? Craig and Maria.
Question again on in your Partners for Justice program. I'm really interested in where Delaware stands on the elimination of bail bonds. I think
That
that's
has been
a big problem for people. So I don't know if that's part of your discussion later or whatever. But I was interested in that, and also in probation reform as there are laws pending.
Bail reform has historically been an issue of DCJ's. In fact, we had worked on, I believe, the last big push for that was in 2000. And Dave, you may actually remember this, 2018 or 2019. Our previous policy director, Kate Parker, had been a real leader on that. And we'd like to get back to it because our partners that everything we do in terms of policy is done as part of a coalition. Because we've got one full-time person dedicated to policy, it's very hard to for us to do everything we want to do. So some things we simply amplify, others we sign on to, and others we take the lead. So we would like to get back to that work because it is very important. And probation reform, this past year, the ACLU of Delaware supported a bill, I believe it was Senate Bill 4. Again, if anyone knows, correct me if I'm wrong, which was a very large probation reform bill. And I believe it had a large fiscal note. A lot of what made that fiscal note a problem has been worked out of the bill. But one of the big pieces of that bill was it made it very, very difficult for folks to be incarcerated for simple technical violations because people go back to jail on probation for missing appointments. That's it. Failing a drug test, I get it. I was a probation officer. It's a big deal, but there are other options. We can send folks for treatment. We can support them in the community. We don't have to lock them up. And that was a big portion of that bill. And DCJ was a partner in that bill and very much supportive of that bill. And we will be watching that when the session resumes.
Thank you.
Sure. And I'm going to pass the baton to someone who actually knows what he's talking about and isn't talking about this from the helicopter view like me. And that is Tali Nichols, our systems navigator, who can talk about our expungement work, which has become a big part of what we do now at DCJ.
Good evening. I don't know if I could see you sit from the helicopter. Dave comes to the field quite often with us. Does come on the field and at least have conversations about what's going on in the different service programs that we offer. I am a little sick, a little under the weather. I don't know what has gone on in the state of Delaware, but it's something has swept through here and it kind of sat me down. Thankfully, it was not COVID. So I'm able to attend this meeting tonight and hopefully give y'all some insight about the expungement program that I happen to help out and have the opportunity to help different clients throughout the state get second chances. So from the very beginning, when we talk about expungement, we're talking about giving clients second chances. These are people that have made mistakes. These are clients that have made mistakes in life. They have done everything in their power to change their life around. And now they just want a record when they get pulled over. I say all the time now in the state and throughout the country, we don't really go through we go through what they call, what I like to call record racism, right? Where a cop will pull you over based on what he pulls up in his data report. And sometimes that can make for a good exchange or a bad exchange, even for something as simple as a speeding ticket. So we strive to help clients get that cleared up. So when they come to me, they usually have charges, whether they're misdemeanors or, now keep in mind that if it's a high class felony or if it's anything involving the victim, you can't get an expungement at all, right? So anything that is involving a victim or anything that is a felony or multiple charges, then what happens is you have to seek a pardon. And then I usually refer clients to the Apex program, or I'll send them to get their fingerprints and then refer them to the Apex program. So what I usually help clients with is clients that have literally made one mistake in their life. My current population has been from anywhere between 18-year-old college students to 70-year-old young people that had just said, hey man, I didn't even know this was on my record. Surprisingly, well, let me not say surprisingly, I had a client about 3 weeks ago that had a charge that was still open from 1979, right? It had no disposition on it. He had no idea that the charge was still open. It was pending. And we're saying, hold up, this is 50 years. Why is this still on your record? Why it has not been closed? So I also help clients to get those type of cases closed, working with Delges and ODS as well. So what I do on the ground level is I canvass different neighborhoods, I set up different clinics, and I interact with all the people. So I go and find who needs to get expungements, who's eligible for it, and then I walk them through the process. And a walk them through the process could be anywhere from literally picking clients up, taking them down to Troop 2, taking them to Dover, taking them to Sussex, to all the way until providing the funding. Some of them call me every single day. Did my paperwork come back? What's the next step? And we just, I just hand walk them through it, because it can be intimidating for anybody to say, hey, man, you have to go into a police station and get fingerprinted. And then with the fingerprints, it's like you got to stay there and wait. And then you got to pay, well, it was $52. That has just recently changed. And then language barrier. So it's so many different things that could hinder any client from getting expungement. I am happy to announce to everyone on this call that DCJ will finally have the opportunity to run Delaware's first Hispanic expungement clinic, where we will focus strictly on the Hispanic population, November 18th, where we have an opportunity to partner with Newcastle County and the Latin Community Center to really serve a population that really needs expungements, but the language barriers from that doesn't always allow them to do it. So DCJ is heading the program. I will be running all of the groundwork, myself and the deputy director, to get this thing really organized and really up and moving. And hopefully we can make this like an annual event is my long-term goal, to make sure. Now, we do expungement events throughout the state. Right now, I've been working for DCJ again 18 months, and I've had a caseload of 302 people as of today, right? And I probably got about 6 or 7 more people to add into my database. Like I said, I've been sick the last few days, so I haven't cleared out my voicemail to really find out. But as of tonight, right now, looking at my spreadsheet, we've helped 302 clients, either with assisting them through the program, whether they actually completed it, or through the referral program where we sent them to ODS or APEC. So some of the frequent questions that I get with expungement is, what's the difference between a mandatory expungement and a discretionary expungement? And just to educate for everybody that do not know, or for the people that are curious, so a mandatory expungement, again, is for one-offs. It's usually for recently we had a bunch of clients, college students, that were just catching Walmart charges, right? They struggling, they're in school, they don't swipe everything, right? Unfortunately, Walmart has getting Walmart, they're getting a little sophisticated. You can't just walk out of places without swiping all of your items in the self-checkout. And these are kids, some of them on, scholarships. Some of them really don't have any money. They're working, they're in school, and they like, well, if I, don't swipe a case of noodles and I swipe the other cases, maybe I'll get away with it. Unfortunately, that's not how it always works out. And they get charged with this, right? Theft under $1,000. And this goes on their record. Now what they realize is, oh, this actually follows me. This theft is on my record and it follows me. Some people take probation before judgment, which can be expunged. Some people have the charge nolly process. If you're lucky enough to get a prosecutor that say, you know what, man, I understand, we're going to throw the charge out and give you a chance. But with that being said, with nolly process, as we know, you're not saying you're not guilty, you're not saying you are guilty. So it's like an in-between in a nolly process, and it remains on kids' records. So we've had the opportunity to go through and help all of them kids get their record expunged through our expungement process. So the mandatory expungement is for cases that were dismissed, cases that were nolly processed, and cases that are currently have PBJ, which is probation before judgment. Now, the discretionary process is a little different. With the discretionary, with the mandatory, you don't have to actually go in front of a judge. You don't have to file a motion. It's you get your fingerprints. They tell you what you're eligible for. The state police tells you, they respond, and then you go in and get your record by paying the fee. Get your record clear by paying the fee. With a discretionary expungement, these are for people that have more than one misdemeanors. These are for clients that may have already had a charge pardon They may have heard of a record pardon. And once a record is pardoned, it still needs to go through an expungement process that comes completely off of your record. That will fall underneath of the discretionary process. One felony, class F, that's eligible for a discretionary expungement. Again, anything that involves a victim cannot be expunged, and DUIs cannot be expunged. You must go through pardon if you have a DUI, or if you have a multiple felonies, you have to go get pardoned. And if it's a victim. So with that being said, the discretionary process is a little different because you actually have to file a motion with the courts. The district attorney or the state's attorney, they get an opportunity to respond to it, and then the judge has the final say. So it's a little longer process. That process can take somewhere around 90 to 120 days when going through a discretionary expungement. And clients aren't always successful with the expungement process, with the discretionary process, because it's a little bit more rigorous. And the pardon process finally is usually takes about 18 months to completely go through, because depending on what type of crime it was, depending if you need a psychological evaluation, depending on what time of the year it is. If it's election time, it's even harder to get in. So just different stages of the expungement and the pardon process that you have to go through. Is there any questions about the expungement process as of right now?
Hey, Holly, I have one question. What percent on the discretionary, what generally is the sort of success rate? Is it almost all get approved, or most? Or
No. I like to say yes, but unfortunately, any time when you're going in front of a judge and a prosecutor, and things could change. So it really depends. For my current clients, I could actually say out of the 300, I've probably sent 100, and I can give you a direct number in 1 second. Hold on, let me pull my spreadsheet up. So I've currently sent over 172 clients for 62 clients for discretionary expungement. Out of the discretionary expungements that have went through, only 59 have been granted, to give you a percentile of what that would be. So, and everybody else that I've ever either seen were either mandatories or needed pardons. So if a client, again, if a mandatory is going to go through, because once the state police see that you're eligible, the statute is pretty clear. But no, everybody's not successful whenever we're dealing with the expungement process with the discretionary.
And I just had one other question. What difference does expungement make with respect to your ability to get a job?
A big difference. So I actually just started a web series on DCJ Second Chances page, where we did something called the pull-up. And what I did was we went around and we interviewed clients that have successfully went through the expungement process, and what was the difference between them getting the expungement process and having expungement done and not having it. You would be surprised of how many employers, how many landlords actually pull people's record and see certain things and say, I'm not hiring you because you have a theft on your charge. Never mind that you did the theft when you were 22 and you're 42 now. I had one young lady. She's 35 years old. She has 4 kids. She caught a bunch of really bad misdemeanors when she was a young lady. All of the charges were nolly processed, so she was never actually found guilty on none of the charges. It happened within a 3-year window between the ages of 22 and 25. This young lady has been trying to get into nursing school and been trying to do different things, and it's always been blocked because they're looking at her record saying, well, you got this on there and you got that on there. How can we trust you with this? How can you? And she just reached a point where she got so frustrated that she fell into addiction. And she went through years of the addiction and finally rebounded from that, got herself out of that, and said, man, let me try again. And she happened to call me and told me her story. We were able to get her record completely expunged because, again, she had one charge that she was actually found guilty on and everything else was nolly processed. So she was eligible for a mandatory expungement. Now she's working as a home care nurse aide or something, where they go place to place and help client people with disability. So she was able to start providing for her family and provide for her 4 kids, which was a great thing. So it matters. It matters. And again, we go through a lot of record discrimination when applying for even housing. Certain landlords don't want, if they see something on your criminal background, they say, nah, I'd rather not take the risk of, even though it may not be a situation where they didn't pay their rent. It may be a situation where a client, well, again, was caught theft for under $1,500. It happened in 2001. We're in 2023. And I always say this, man. If any of us were judged on things we did as teenagers, we all be in prison, right? Because it's natural in life. We made some mistakes, whether it was underage drinking in college, whether it was, nobody's looking and you put a candy bar in your pocketbook in high school, right? Everybody has done something at that age where the brain has not fully developed to even weigh out consequences. Now, with that being said, we understand that we all mature at different levels, right? So, there's no telling when a person is going to get his breakthrough. Some people have it figured out, as soon as when they come up, start walking, but most of us don't, right? It's always saying you got to crawl before you walk, man, and it's just the reality. And all of us have children now. Some of us have, children that are adults, and you got to put yourself in a position. If your child was caught in college stealing, a pack of noodles, would you want that to affect him the rest of his life or her the rest of her life? The answer to that question is no. It was a pack of noodles. For whatever reason, she didn't call mom or dad to say, hey, I need $20. And she's like, nobody's looking. And here it is. You're a criminal now, considered a criminal. So
Are there any statistics on? I've always thought that one of the significant, I shouldn't say biggest, measures of racial discrimination was who gets a second chance without getting charged. I mean,
yeah.
I had a lot of friends and others that got into trouble and people sort of gave them a second chance and they didn't have to go through the system. But I get the sense that that kind of treatment is very different depending on.
I'll say this. I'm not qualified. I haven't done the proper research to answer that. To answer that question with certainty, I only can speak about my past experiences, what I've witnessed, what clients going through the progress, but we're not going to be in denial and act like that it's not an issue. It's definitely an issue. What the actual statistics of it is, I couldn't speak on that. I'm not qualified to speak on it because I haven't done the proper data research.
Thanks. Thank you.
I see Craig and Maria had their hands raised.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
wait a
Holly,
minute. I have a question.
it's Lucy first.
Huh?
I seen Craig and Maria hands raised first.
You can't
And
hear
then
me?
Okay, Tahali, how much does it usually cost for you to get someone through the expungement process in general?
well, it's 2 courses. So the very first course was $52, right? That has just recently changed as of 2 weeks ago, where now it costs us $72. So that's just for the fingerprint. So every client that goes through the expungement process, the very first step is they have to be fingerprinted. So depending on what county you're in, whether it's Newcastle County, Kent, or Sussex, I have the opportunity to work with all three counties. And I'm the only one that actually does that. Through all organizations, I'm the only one that actually go and work with clients in all 3 counties. So $52 it is now $72. And then if you're eligible for the mandatory expungement or the discretionary expungement, the very next fee would be $75. So to answer your question, it would be $140 143. Is that what that is? 143? Somewhere in that area, 147.
Can I ask
Ms.
a question?
Pebbles?
Yes.
Yes,
Listen,
ma'am.
do you have as much success with female offenders than you do with men? And the females who have children, how do you measure or get around to getting them straight? Because I think females have a harder time going back into the system if they have children and no, no visible means of support. So do you have that problem?
I will say this. Again, certain things I haven't done the proper data research on to give you a qualified answer. I only can speak of my experiences as doing this job. What I will say is this: majority, I will say, around 65% of my clients are females.
Oh,
I will say that. Ironically, I have more client females than I do have. I have more female clients than I have male clients. A lot of that comes from men usually are repeat offenders. We know that. So because you're a repeat offender, 9 times out of 10, you're not eligible for the expungement process. You have to get pardoned because most men that enter the system continue entering the system or continue catching charges for a period of time. Now, once you catch your second and third felony, it takes you out of the expungement process. For females, you could say usually when they catch their first charge, they don't want to be taken away from their kids because 9 times out of 10, they are the ones that are the providers for the children. So the females are usually the clients that say, listen, I only got one thing on my record, two things on my record, and that's it. Where men usually have multiple charges, which takes them out of the expungement criteria.
Good question.
I seen somebody else.
I learned something tonight. Thank you, Della. I did not know that. That's interesting. There are a couple, I know we're a little over, and I do want to talk about our policy priorities, but I think I can start doing that by looking at the questions that are in the chat. I think we've talked about who we help, but how are we funded? Probably about 75 to 80% of our budget at this point is state contracts, either directly through the DOC, through the Criminal Justice Council. There is some grant funding there. Tali's position was funded in part with the Longwood grant we received. He's also funded by the National Clean Slate Initiative, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Jane asked the excellent question of DCJ, what is your main focus? I know when I got to DCJ, and Dave probably remembers some of these discussions, board members have always said, well, it's tough to say what DCJ does. And I think the way to answer that is not to say what we do, but who we serve. And I think if you take a look across all of our programs, take a snapshot of that, you'll know at any point in time what the criminal legal system in Delaware is up to, how it's impacting people, how it's transforming lives. And what our main focus is to take that, help people at the individual level, get through the system and out of the system and stay out, but also try to make that system better. And that is the focus of our policy work, which is most often informed by, as well as informs, our direct service work. I'm going to hop back on my PowerPoint here and then wrap up with that, some stuff about that. So our major, again, as I mentioned before, our policy and education work is both proactive and reactive. There are things we decide we want to focus on, which in this case would be the clean slate work. Wrongful convictions compensation has been a big part of our push for the last few years. And then things that sort of come to us that we react to, and policing reform and compassionate release would fall into that. So the clean slate work, we're part of the Delaware Clean Slate Coalition. There are similar programs funded all over the country by the National Clean Slate Initiative. Like I said, how they fund us helps us to pay for Tali's work. But every year we have a different focus. And actually this coming year, the law that went into effect, or was passed a few years ago, actually goes into effect. So the mandatory expungements for, I believe, 290,000 low-level criminal records will finally come to pass in next August. And I do want you to think about, this gives me pause as to how many people get charged with crimes in Delaware. We are not talking about serious offenses. These are the low-level crimes that qualify for those mandatory expungements. And we're talking about the equivalent of 1/3 of our state's population that simply has that record floating out there. So Delaware charges a lot of people, and Delaware really likes its criminal records. So it's an uphill fight. And just to speak again to the work Tali is doing, we are incredibly blessed that the Bar Foundation, Amazon, and some other fund, JP Morgan Chase, have provided funding. It's not enough, but whenever we can, we are able to pay for people to apply for that process so they don't have to pay for it themselves. So we're very grateful for that support. Very quickly, back to the clean slate work. This past year, we were focused on, and we will continue to focus on, passing what we call a non-convictions bill. And it helps a very specific group of people. If you are under the custody of the Department of Correction, either in prison or on probation, you are not eligible to have charges or charges expunged that were adjudicated in your favor. So you had a charge that was null prost, you had a charge that you were found not guilty of, or a charge that was dropped. They're still on your record in Delaware, still can work against you. And even though they were disposed of in your favor, you cannot request an expungement if you're actively on probation. So as I said earlier, the two biggest things that indicate whether someone's going to succeed at reentry: employment and housing. And that record keeps you from getting employment and housing. There was one person in particular we worked with who had been charged with a crime at a bank she worked at. If the charges were dropped, it turned out it was someone else who had done it. But even on probation, she could still conceivably, because of the current charge, possibly get work in a bank, and she couldn't because that charge could not be removed from a record. So that's what, in a nutshell, what the non-convictions bill does. We are hoping it will pass this year. It did not get as much momentum as we hoped last year. DCJ has been a part of the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force that resulted, two of our staff were involved, and it resulted as following the murder of George Floyd. And although that process took a few years, at the end of this year, near the end of session, House Bill 205 and House Bill 206, which addressed, in addition to some other things that I'm not going to recall properly, so I'll stick to what I remember, some issues regarding discovery of police records in cases for the defense, on the defense side of things, as well as how communities are allowed to monitor police activity and be involved in how police officers are held accountable for those instances of bad behavior. Those two bills were the end result of that. And DCJ, although we still think it has a long way to go, supported those two bills as a first step toward more comprehensive policing reform. And they did pass. And every year, the education part of our policy and education work is that we offer the Visions of Justice Conference. That's occurring this year on October 25th, and it covers a lot of these topics. But one of the things we're really excited about is that the day will end with the advocates coming together to talk about what the next steps will be for our advocacy as an advocacy community, to try to make sure that we don't lose momentum on policing reform, because while we've made some progress, it's not enough. Wrongful convictions compensation has been a big part of DCJ's policy push in the last few years. This is paying folks for the time they were incarcerated when they were wrongfully convicted. If you've heard of Elmer Daniels, I know he's spoken at DCJ events before I arrived, before the pandemic. But these are folks who did not commit the crime, for whatever reason were convicted, and spend years and sometimes decades in prison and come out, frankly, to a world entirely different than the one they went into, or one they left rather. And they need that support. They need compensation for the time they spent, so they are able to cope in this new world they're entering. And lastly, one of our board members, Dr. Yasser Payne from University of Delaware, you may know of the book he published recently, Murder Town, which talks about all the drivers of crime in Wilmington. Has become a champion of reinvigorating compassionate release, which is available to prisoners in Delaware who are old or infirm. We are specifically looking and talking about a population of about 150 people who have been in prison for decades, most of whom are not there for very violent crimes. They are not there for rape. They are not there for murder. They committed assault. They committed drug crimes, and they have been there a very long time. And most of them have a pretty good disciplinary record on the inside, because as folks are in prison for a long period of time, generally they become very good inmates. They become mentors to their fellow inmates. Currently our reentry program is working with a case of a gentleman who got out. He's in his mid-70s, has a heart condition, has vision problems, was thinking he was going to have to get out and get a job, and nobody told him there were other resources available to him. So we connected him with our programs, and he is now receiving benefits. We got him some new glasses, again, simple barriers that we don't think about necessarily, and got him a nice place to live. And he's doing fine. But he had been in for over 40 years. And that is just a slice. Again, as things come up, as bills are introduced, as issues of concern gain traction, we may weigh in on them at any time. Either our director of policy would do it through some communication statements. We may reach out to you if you're on our mailing list and say, we'd love you to contact your legislator because this is something we care about, and here's what you should say. So that is one way to be a part of DCJ's work. But as I've tried to find, I think I found one other agency in the country that is similar to what DCJ does, and that is in Illinois, that provides both services, comprehensive services statewide, as well as policy reform work. So DCJ is unique. And I'm not just saying that because I'm proud of it.
Yeah, I think, and Dave, I think we've always thought that DCJ has when it comes to the policy or the advocacy work, DCJ has a special role because it has on the ground experience, like Holly was just describing. And well, I didn't mean to interrupt you, so
No, thank you very much for that. And I agree. And I just, to sort of bring it all back together, one of our peers, I got to tell you about our peer specialists. This is a tough job. These are the folks that pick people up the prison gate. They're on call. We now have 5 of them. Thank goodness. It used to be 3, so they're only on call every 5th week. But folks with families who could probably make a lot more money somewhere else, but they really care about this work. And Marcus was one of the first. He is still with us. 2 of the 3 original are still with us 3 years later. And he said of all the work we do, that reentry is just the beginning. At the end of the day, we want to see homeowners, we want to see business owners, we want to see CEOs. Tali talked a lot about second chances, and that is something DCJ believes in above all else, is second chances. And frankly, third chances, fourth chances, whatever it takes to get people to where they need to be. And I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any other questions. You've been very gracious in listening to us for, I think, 15 minutes longer than your meeting was supposed to go.
if no one else has a question, and I don't mean to cut, I wanted to ask or raise something with you, Dave, that I just learned yesterday. You and I are both on the board of the Innocence Project. And this goes to the question of compensation for people wrongfully convicted. Not only is that Delaware is, I think, one of a minority of states that provide no compensation. Most states do. And the thing I didn't realize is that when someone comes out and they've been convicted and they served their sentence, there are services available to them through, I guess, the parole and probation process, but that for people who are wrongfully convicted and exonerated, there are no services. And so not only you're treated worse than you would be if you had been convicted and then released. And that's just another reason for the compensation being provided is to help people get back on their feet. But also another shout out for the Innocence Project is that for DCJ is that DCJ is working with the Innocence Project to try to set up a structure by which people that are exonerated can get some of the same services that are provided for others.
Absolutely. Always good to shout out the Innocence Project. That's an amazing, amazing organization that Dave and I are both proud to be part of. Craig and Maria.
Dave, thank you for letting us know that Delaware has one of the, and I may say this incorrectly, one of the highest rates of charging individuals.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important card. I think that speaks loads to where our criminal justice system lies. I would also love to see the demographics and the racial distribution, because I would bet that Hispanics and Blacks are very high on that totem pole. And again, that speaks to me widely of injustice. We get them in jail. They can't pay for bail. They're in jail. We charge them with something. They serve their time. The probation person dings them for some stupid thing. Now they have more fees as they get them back into jail. And one of the reasons why you don't get out of probation is because you haven't paid your fees, correct?
Yes.
No, this goes on and on and on. I'd really like you to, or someone to find out where that data is of why we're incarcerating so many people. We, the public, are paying for this injustice that's committed to people who then can't get a job, can't get housing, in some cases can't get any federal subsidies like food stamps, etc. And we do this to people. And then we wonder why we have high criminal rates all over the cities. What option are we giving people? So I'd like to, in the future, learn more about that. And what can we do to stop this vicious cycle that I feel the criminal justice system has created?
I can illuminate that a little bit. And I know this statistic was correct, I believe, in 2019. Black Delawareans represent 60% of the prison population, but less than 25% of the general population. That gives us, and that is uniquely bad in America. We are one of the worst. And our recidivism rate is after 3 years is recommitment rate, excuse me, not recidivism rate, recommitment, people going back to jail, 66%.
Mm-hmm.
Our programs cut that in half. We know that. We've tracked that over time. But that also means if you're looking at an average, there's people whose recidivism rate is, or recommitment rate is a lot worse, just to make that average pan out. And this is my personal experience, so don't quote me on this. I was a probation officer, as I said. And I'll be honest, I had a domestic violence case that I had one of the highest arrest records in my department. But if the victim was not in danger, I would work with people in the community. It was only when someone's safety was threatened. So when I got to DCJ and learned about our reentry work, of course, I thought it was great. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, this is just good probation and parole work. Why aren't the POs doing this? And Delaware's, and again, this is my observation. I don't have data to back this up. But my impression of probation and parole here is that they see themselves as policing the probation population. They do not see themselves as I don't want to say restorative justice professionals, because I don't think most probation officers do, but they don't see their job as to rehabilitate or to get people to a better place. And that deeply concerns me. And it's why DCJ, the Innocence Project, Hope Commission, I could go on and name the great programs here in Delaware are so necessary. Frankly, why we need your support. So if you go on our website, and I'll put the link in the chat, please go on and make a donation, but also thank this group in particular for supporting us over the years, because I know you have. And last but not least, to speak to what you said about us subsidizing this terrible system. I mentioned earlier that a probation bill was in trouble because of a fiscal note. And this is something that's frustrated me. And I've talked about this with my colleagues in the work, and I think I'm going to speak to it. This is going to be my remarks at this year's Visions of Justice. But what's the fiscal note of not doing anything? It is the most expensive, least effective fiscal note, which is continuing to incarcerate people that I believe, last time I checked, was at about $45,000 a year. There is no other community-based solution that is, I mean, I'm going to get my negatives messed up. All community-based solutions are cheaper and more effective than that. So why do we even let them get away with that argument about the fiscal note?
Yeah.
Why don't they give you the $45,000?
That's the point.
Send
Yeah.
them a letter, please. But
And
to your point
what-
about what we can do, we have a gubernatorial election coming up. We need to we need to ask tough questions of those folks. We're obviously a nonprofit. We're not endorsing a candidate, but we can talk about issues. And I think our intention is to ask the candidates about these issues and say, you know, where do you land here? And then hold their feet to the fire when they are elected.
David,
I-
one of the pieces in SB4 included participation of those in probation in programs such as yours. And one of the insistence was that was a necessary part, and that was included in the bill. Do you know whether that made the cut?
I
Where
think
we
I'm
at?
remembering the bill, and I think that don't quote me. I think that was one of the casualties of that bill, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, see,
It hits the fiscal note.
Again, what do? We create the problem, we stop the solution, we heap more calamity on the system, and then we wonder why people continue to have why we have such bad recidivism. We created this monster. We created probation. We set the criteria for failure. Yes, you're right. Gubernatorial races are coming. We need to hold everybody accountable, because I keep telling people, we're paying for this. I just assume you be in a program and you become a successful citizen the way you should have been if we've left you alone.
And I mean, the gubernatorial race is important just because it's so obvious right now, but and I will say, over the last few years, we've had some really great people elected to the state legislature who care about these issues. All of the issues that I shared from our legislative priorities have their champions. We couldn't do it without that. But definitely let your legislators know you know this is going on, and if you know them personally, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Email me and say, hey, my senator or my representative is having coffee with me. You want to come along? I'm happy to talk to them. So, but reach out to me at any time. Email's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm the worst person for returning phone calls. I'm not going to lie.
Well, I don't know if anyone else have any final questions? If not, I'm just going to thank Dave and Tali and for just really an excellent presentation. And I'll put a pitch in that you can go on the website and make a donation. And boy, does DCJ need the money. I was going to ask Dave the question of how big the need is, and just in terms of the reentry issue, how big the need is versus how much resources are being committed to it. But I'm sure it's a small percentage.
Just to give some perspective, to make all of these programs work, we have to raise about $500,000 a year on top of our contracts. We do our best, and any amount helps, but obviously we'd be appreciative of that. Thank you, Sally, for your very kind words. And thank you everyone for the questions, for participating, for sticking it out until 8:22. Tali and I are very grateful, as is everyone at DCJ.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.